It's a lot easier to get straight A's when you're not hungry, worried about where you're going to sleep, or commuting an hour each way. Remove those barriers and those students can do really well.
Welcome to Innovating Education, the podcast where we explore fresh ideas, groundbreaking strategies, and expert insights to transform the way we teach and support students. I'm your host, Dr. Riley Williams, and it is my honor to bring you conversations with educators, thought leaders, and innovators shaping the future of education. Today's guest is nothing short of extraordinary. Ruthe Farmer has spent the better part of 2 decades as a fierce advocate for equity in education and technology. She served as Senior Policy Advisor for Tech Inclusion in the Obama White House, led the National CSforAll initiative, and has helped launch countless programs that empower girls and underrepresented students in STEM fields. One of my favorite of her contributions is Computer Science Education Week, which has helped catapult it into a national movement that has since brought coding and computational thinking into millions of classrooms. But today we're going to be shining a spotlight on one of her most impactful efforts, the Last Mile Education Fund. This is a visionary program addressing the financial barriers that stop low-income students that are just short of completing their degrees in tech and engineering. Ruth's work isn't just about widening the pipeline, it's about making sure that those who are already in it actually reach the finish line. And while her focus often centers on higher education and workforce pathways, the lessons and strategies she brings to the table have deep implications in education for all, especially as we rethink equity access and long-term student success. Ruthe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, you have led some of the most influential programs in STEM education, but I understand that your spark for this work started during your own college experience. Can you take us back to that moment? What opened your eyes to the need for equity in education and tech?
So I remember as a college sophomore, I took a class in the rhetoric of women, and Jean Ward was the professor, and I was shocked that as a sophomore in college, it was like the first time I was learning about many of the women who founded suffrage, who led to the temperance movement, like all of these incredible women who had, despite not even being able to vote, had done tremendous things for society. And the fact that that was just not taught to me. And I didn't really learn about it until being a sophomore in college. And I thought to myself, like, how are young women supposed to aspire if we don't have any role models in the system? So that's kind of where I started to be an activist. I was going to say angry. I got a little angry and started to be an activist about that. And then I went into a career in marketing and advertising. And when I was, I think it was 2001, I made this huge pivot. I left corporate marketing and I went to the Girl Scouts, and I was fortunate to be able to sort of marry my passion about feminism and equal access for women and girls and wanting women and girls to have access to like good paying jobs with, at the time, Intel gave Girl Scouts the largest grant they had ever given to a nonprofit outside of a university, because they had taken over the sponsorship of the National Science Fair, and they found that there weren't girls in computer science, engineering, and math in the science fair. There were lots of girls in psychology and biology and other fields, environmental science, but not in those hard sciences. And so I worked with Intel and the Girl Scouts to build out a national curriculum and program to bring more girls into the engineering process, an engineering pathway, but learning the design process, which now that program has scaled all over the place. And I personally think Intel Design and Discovery is probably one of the most impactful design process curricula I've ever seen. And that is a middle school curriculum that we built out both as a summer camp and as a classroom opportunity. And so that kind of got me down this road of, okay, I want women and girls to be independent, have sufficient money, be able to build careers, and STEM, where a STEM degree is the fastest pathway to a professional salary, yet women are still underrepresented in tech and engineering. Like, we've done really well in medicine. Women are more than half of doctors now, but we're still really, really low, like 20% when it comes to computing. And I think now, in the world we all live in which we literally live on a device all the time, that making sure that those technologies that we are using every day are built by all of the people is really important.
So, you've said it's not just about exposure to engineering and computer science, but it's about giving students real ownership of the learning. What strategies have you seen that actually do that and do it well?
I think the best thing about design and discovery was the best thing and the hardest thing was that we did not dictate what project the girls would do. And so they had to find a problem that they wanted to solve that they cared about. And I remember going to the science fair and seeing 20 kids all doing, like, how do you make the strongest bridge out of popsicle sticks? And did they learn something in that process? Probably. Was it easiest for the educator to have a lot of popsicle sticks and a lot of glue and a lot of paper? Sure. But was there any intrinsic motivation by that kid to solve that problem? And so with design and discovery, we spent the first couple of days being like, look, the world is designed by people to solve problems. You too can change the world around you. And we created something called a bug list, like, what bugs you? Put it on your bug list. And so we were showing them design solutions in the environment, and they would get so excited to be like, oh my gosh, this thing is solving this thing, and they're figuring it out. And we would take them on little field trips, like we went to Home Depot, and they're like, this cart is for plants, and that cart is for wood, and they're understanding the design solution. And then they would come and they'd be like, oh, well, this doesn't work, and this doesn't work for me, or this is too tall, and I'm like, put it on your bug list. So then they would come up with something that really was important to them that they wanted to solve. And it was challenging for the educators because we had to then go get the supplies for every possible project that they had come up with. But their commitment to it and commitment to solving that problem was so worth it. And so I think connecting with the actual needs and drivers of that student. So I remember one student in particular, both parents were incarcerated and she lived with her grandparents, and Oregon is very wet. This was in Oregon. It's wet there. It rains, it's wet. And her tennis shoes would get wet on the way home from school, and she'd put them in the dryer and they would make a lot of noise. Bang, 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 going around in the dryer. And it always upset her grandpa. He didn't want the noise. So she ended up coming up with, and I think this is a really cool product, basically like a mesh bag that had like magnets that you could suspend your tennis shoes in the center of the dryer. So the dryer would turn and the tennis shoes would get dry, but they weren't banging around, right? And I think one of her iterations, she had the one that was magnetized, and then she had one that, like, it hung on the door, so the shoes sat on the door when it was closed in a little mesh bag. Totally sellable product. Like, I could imagine seeing that product online right now on Amazon, right? And that was her personal problem to solve. And so her commitment to solving it was there. And I think the other thing about that was really powerful was imparting on them that they had the power to change the world around them. I think that women are extraordinarily good at adapting to things that weren't built for us, because most things are not built for us. And somehow we're imparting that tendency to just accept that onto kids and disrupting that early in their lives and be like, no, if it doesn't work, you can change it. You can make something better. And that's where inventors come from. And we had quite a few inventions come out of that program. And I think letting the students own it is a critical part of the solution.
So, from your perspective, what are the key levers that we need to pull to ensure that every young person has real lasting access to opportunities like these?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. One of the things that really concerns me is the tendency to um, be like, expect. So, in computer science, for example, we want all students to learn foundational computing. We want them to understand that computers are programmed by someone who has a motive, that the device in your hand is not a neutral device per se. So we want to understand that things are programmed, and we want them to understand that they can create those programs and solutions themselves and how to do that. And one of the ways that inequity comes to play in this is the assumption that everyone has equal access to spend a bunch of personal time playing around with the technology. And so, and this plays out in lots of ways, but in the really seminal book, Stuck in the Shallow End, which was from about 2005, was a case study of a magnet STEM high school in Los Angeles public schools, where even though it was a magnet STEM high school in the most diverse district in the country, still there were only white and Asian kids in the computer science pathways. And what they found was what Dr. Jane Margolis termed as preparatory privilege, in that students who were coming from affluent white and Asian families whose parents were engineers, they were being taken to Maker Faire on the weekends. They had their own device at home. They didn't have as many home responsibilities like caring for their siblings, so they could spend 2 hours a night playing around on their device. And so the teachers and the counselors would be like, oh, that's the tech kids, because they're always talking about tech and they're talking about the games they do. They're talking about the stuff. And so they were tracking those kids into computing. And then the primarily low-income Black and brown kids who didn't have their own device at home and were watching their siblings all the time while their parents worked, they were assumed to not have the interest or the aptitude. But it wasn't that. It was that they had not had prior access. And so they're misinterpreting prior access as interest and aptitude. So I think all of the ways, and I think we totally saw this during COVID, where I think it was a New York Times or Washington Post article that did this about the inequity of Ivy League students who then suddenly went home. And one Ivy League kid is, oh, I'm spending COVID in my parents' vacation house on Cape Cod. I'm so bored out here. Meanwhile, another young woman is literally trying to do Zoom class off the rear bumper of her parents' food truck. And it was really disrupting that opportunity that really low income students get when they go to an Ivy League school to like level up and fit in, and nobody necessarily knows, right? And suddenly there was this whole phenomenon. Nobody wants to turn on their camera because you don't want people to see your home or your situation. Or kids are trying to share a device between multiple kids, or the older siblings are having to literally be the teacher for their younger siblings who are trying to also do Zoom school. I think we all saw that, right? And there were all of the kids sitting outside a Taco Bell using the internet, pictures that ended up. I think we really, really learned a lot about the disparities in access at home. And so one of the things I tell teachers when I'm talking to them about computer science education, I'm like, there should be no homework. Like, you should be doing everything in the classroom that requires those devices, because otherwise you are creating inequities, expecting students to have not only the access to the device and the internet, but the time to spend on it. And that over advantages people who don't have responsibilities for siblings or having to work and those types of issues.
You've often spoke about the importance of designing for scale and equity from day one. In addition, what are some other common missteps that schools or organizations make when trying to expand access to STEM and computing?
Well, so when I talk about designing for scale, not everything should scale. You could have an incredibly impactful, amazing program that serves 20 kids that should just exist in its own right. And the question I ask people to ask themselves, does this program depend upon the energy and personality of a dynamic individual? That does not scale. Does this program cost more than $1,000 per person? to implement. Then you have to think really hard about if you should scale it. Because I have seen it over and over where these awesome programs, whether it be robotics programs or academic decathlon, etc., that the kids are on a constant fundraising treadmill. Oh, we won this. Now we got to get to the next level. We need $5,000 to get to the next conference or the next thing. And so then the kids whose dad works at Dell, they're fine. They just, call up dad and he asks his work and they get $5,000 and they go to the next thing. And then the kids who don't have that, we're not trying to raise fundraisers. We're trying to raise engineers, right? So that really, really frustrates me. I think also, if you were spending your own money to launch an initiative that was for profit, right? So your money or your investor's money is at risk. You're going to do a tremendous amount of due diligence to understand the market opportunity, to understand who your competitors are, to understand if solutions already exist, right? In education, and especially in nonprofit, there's a tendency to be like, see a problem, jump to a solution, and not do the due diligence. And there is so much duplication. And duplication not only of curriculum offerings and programs, but duplication of the infrastructure to support that. And what I mean by that is there are 30 million kids going to Girl Scouts, Boys and Girls Club, 4-H, and Campfire. That youth infrastructure is the only place outside of the K-12 school where we have the attention of a child for multiple years in succession. That is literally the Walmart or Amazon of out of school time, right? The distribution channel. Yet, so many people, whether that's because of ego and branding and other things, they're like, I'm going to build a thing, my thing that has my name and my brand, and then I'm going to scale that. I'm like, why are you creating Radio Shack when we have Walmart and Amazon, right? Look at the networks that already exist. If you can drop your curriculum content or your program into the Girl Scouts, you can reach thousands and millions of girls across the whole nation in an infrastructure that already has vetted volunteers who've been through a background check. They're carrying insurance on all of those kids. They have facilities. They have all the things. So I really encourage people to figure out ways that they can collaborate and partner rather than build duplicative infrastructure. The other thing that I think is really important is a kid is not necessarily going to be in a robot club for 8 years. There's not enough content that you have to keep them interested. But they're going to be in the Girl Scouts or the Boy Scouts or the 4-H program for multiple years. And so the real success strategy, I think, is you have to give it to them once and then another year later and another year later. Like, you're going to do the coding badge and the animal badge and the earth badge when you're 5. And then at 7, come back and do a cybersecurity badge and a I'm a good person badge. And it's just a normal part of being a Girl Scout that you are learning this content and you're learning it over and over and over in a community with your peers. And that is really powerful. And I feel like with so many disparate programs that we're asking kids to participate in, there's often this drop off and there's not a handoff to the next thing. And what's beautiful about both the K-12 school system and the out of school time infrastructure is the ability to have that handoff continuum over time. And there's incentives in the system, right? Girl Scouts earn badges. Boy Scouts earn badges. Junior ROTC, they earn insignia that goes on their shirt. And so what are the incentives, structures in those programs that help us pull kids through? And how can you align your content that you want to deliver to the incentives? Just like standards, right? There's badges and other things in those programs. So I think my sort of famous quote is, your lack of research does not create a market opportunity, because there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens, hundreds of things out there that have been created that you should at least learn from before you make something new.
What I'm hearing is that the innovations are only as powerful as their ability to reach and keep reaching the students that need it the most. What does it take to build education efforts that don't just launch with a ton of excitement, but they last with real staying power?
I think one is it aligned to the incentives that exist in the system? And I think a really great example of this is the very successful AP Computer Science Principles course, which was 15 years in the making, right? So they just came out with a study last month from Stanford that said that AP Computer Science has increased participation in college computer science enrollment, especially among women and people of color. That's what it was intended to do. And 175,000 kids are taking this test each year. And it was the biggest launch of an AP course in history. So great. How do you create the reason we wanted to create AP Computer Science Principles was because AP is something that college going students do. And so we had to set out to create a course, get all these universities to give credit for it, get all these teachers prepared to teach it. But now it's there and it's evergreen. In the same way that there are now 78 badges in Girl Scouts in cybersecurity, computer science, and engineering, starting from age 4 all the way to age 18. Those are evergreen. Those are there forever for every girl in every zip code in the United States. And that's what's going to sustain it. Now, could it be amplified with corporate partners? 100%. I live on the Front Range of Colorado. You literally cannot swing a cat without hitting a PhD in something. We have 11 national research labs here. And it makes no sense for a Girl Scout troop to be sitting there trying to teach themselves cybersecurity when you've got talented professionals here. So I am really looking forward to when we figure out how to effectively bring the corporate talent together with the youth programs and the schools. And it's not easy. You can't just roll up to a school and be like, I'm here to teach you. That doesn't always work. But figuring out how to make those partnerships work and leveraging all of the volunteers. And one of the things that I believe about Girl Scouts, and I'm on the board of Girl Scouts of Oregon, and I work with Girl Scouts of Colorado, and I am sort of a green blood for life. But if there was ever a time for men to step up and volunteer with Girl Scouts, it's tech and engineering. Men are 80% of the technology workforce. So your brothers, your uncles, your grandpas, like, get down there. They have a shirt that says man enough to be a Girl Scout. You can be a Girl Scout too, because the content is going to be relevant to all kids. But, girls are still being left out a lot of those educational pathways just by virtue of society, media channels, messaging, and all of the ways that we have historically behaved.
I'm just thinking on a smaller scale. With Kiwanis this year, just for Easter, so it just happened, we decided to partner with the Boys and Girls Club to host our Easter egg hunt because we were having less participants. And in doing so, we had a much greater turnout because we were helping support the Boys and Girls Club. So what I'm really hearing is that networking. I want large scale initiatives, but it's not just our rural schools, our rural areas. Make those connections with your community partners, right?
Well, one of my favorite stories in this, I can take zero credit for this other than I was in the audience when it was announced, but there is an initiative that was announced at the 2013 Clinton Global Initiative called Wash Time is Talk Time. And we know that children from affluent families are spoken to thousands more words before they are 5, when their brains are growing, the critical brain development time, than kids in poverty. And so this early childhood literacy education organization got together with the National Coin Operated Laundry Association. And they put reading kiosks in laundromats. And so they had signs in multiple languages that were talking about the importance of speaking to your child, reading to your child, and interacting with them. Because watching a video is not a substitute for human interaction when you're a baby. And encouraging parents to take the 2 hours that they're spending in the laundromat, instead of reading to themselves or scrolling on their phone, to spend that time interacting with their child. And who would have thought that the Coin Operated Laundry Association, which is like a whole bunch of, just picturing dudes in their late 50s that own laundromats all over the country, that they are becoming this pillar of early childhood education. But it's such a beautiful but disruptive approach. Another really fun example is a project that I did with, actually, I wrote and passed federal law in 2020. And what we'd identified was that there's more than 500,000 students that are in the junior ROTC programs across the United States. It's the largest federally funded youth program. It's also been, 50 years old. It's been around forever. And I did a crosswalk between the schools that had junior ROTC, which is 3,421 schools, and the schools that were teaching computer science. And it was 17%. And that was 2017. It's much better now. But I basically made the argument that, like, these young people have already put on a uniform. They are already expressing interest in working in our national defense. All national defense is technology now. Yet this population could not prepare for a modern defense job if they wanted to, because they don't have the courses in their school. And so I was able to use that to bring it to Congress and talk to senators and members of Congress and say, look, this is a national defense priority. And so we were able to pass a grant program into the defense budget that would fund capacity building for schools that provide junior ROTC for high demand STEM fields. And it was written as capacity for the schools because the halo of those 3,400 schools was actually 4 million kids. So there's 500,000 junior ROTC, but there's over 4 million other kids going to those schools. And so that program was passed in like 2020. The other thing we did with that was we looked at the incentives, right? And students in junior ROTC want to earn badges and insignia to go on their uniform. And so we created the Cyber Readiness Badge that you earned partly by taking AP Computer Science. And so previously, AP Computer Science was in competition with junior ROTC because they were both electives. But this way, AP Computer Science is actually satisfying a requirement for your junior ROTC rewards. And so what are the incentives that already exist, right? What are the levers we can already pull? I mean, I love the Kiwanis example because, like, you want kids to come to your thing. The Boys and Girls Club has kids. And, like, why not? And I think there's also another program that I launched, which I love very much. It's called Aspire IT. And when I had launched Aspirations in Computing, which is a recognition and community for girls in high school that are interested in computer science, those girls started doing, like, I'm going to do an after-school program for middle schoolers, or I'm going to do a summer camp. And so I'm like, let's leverage this. So I raised a bunch of money, and we created a grant program where we said any young woman in Aspirations in Computing who's in high school could have money to start a summer program or an after-school program for other girls. Now, who's more inspiring to a 12-year-old than a 17-year-old? Right? So if you want to get little girls excited about technology, show them a teenager who's excited about technology. The other problem that is solving is that while your local Girl Scout Council or Boys and Girls Club might want to teach computing, they don't have anyone qualified to teach it. So here I am giving them and paying a young woman to teach it. We also had partnerships set up with universities where universities want to do these outreach programs, but those are adult serving organizations. They don't know how to recruit and work with middle schoolers. But the teenagers, they're close to it. They're just out of middle school. They have siblings, they have relationships, they're in Girl Scouts and other programs. So that Aspire IT program launched well over 600 camps and after-school programs led by young women for girls. It also put those young women into a role where they had a paid job on their resume related to technology, which is important to helping them get hired. It also put them in contact with people who became their mentors, who were faculty at universities or staff at the nonprofits they worked with. Some of those organizations have spun out into completely different nonprofits serving thousands of kids a year now. But it was that audaciousness of youth that those young women were like, sure, I can do this. And it's been pretty incredible, but it's leveraging a need, an opportunity, existing resources, and an incentive.
You just blew my mind. You know, we've heard some incredible stories today about students who are defying the odds, but we also know that many fall short, not just from a lack of talent, but from a lack of resources. Your program, the Last Mile Education Fund, is changing that. Can you walk us through what the fund does, who it serves, and how listeners can support or spread the word about your mission?
Sure. So I have been spending the last 2 decades building this pipeline. And due to the joys of social media, I have had a front row seat to the lives of thousands of young people going through the process of becoming engineers and technologists. And so I'm following them on, well, it used to be Facebook. They're not on there anymore, but Instagram, LinkedIn, etc. We're staying in touch. And in 2017, one of the students I had been watching a long time posted on our Facebook group, and she said, what happens if I cancel an internship that I've committed to? And this was April. Like, this was summer of her junior year. This internship is a job interview, right? And you don't cancel your internship at one of the biggest banks in the world in April when you're supposed to start June 1st. So I contacted her and I was like, what's going on? And I kind of had to drag it out of her, but eventually she's, I can't afford a bus ticket from Mississippi to North Carolina. So she had the skills, she had the education, she had been offered this job, but she was literally unable to take it for the cost of transportation and a place to stay when she got there, because the system is that you get your relocation reimbursement in your first paycheck, which you get 3 weeks after you start. So you have to somehow front $3,500 or so of housing and transportation. And so I used air miles to get her there. We found a place for her to stay with a friend. And today she's been a software engineer in the financial sector for more than 5 years. She's also a homeowner. She got married. She's got an adorable son. Like, her life is going great and could have been at least slowed down had she not been able to take that internship. And so she and I and her professor got together and we're like, how many more students like her are out there that are facing some barrier but don't have somebody to ask? And for a student who has made it to their junior year in something as hard as engineering or computer science, we can't afford to lose them. Like, too much has been invested and they've proven themselves. If you have navigated higher education in the United States as a low-income student, as a first-generation college graduate, you've proven you have problem-solving skills. You've proven you have grit and resilience. Like, we need you to finish. And so we built the Last Mile Education Fund as basically a safety net. And I like to joke that we're the cool rich aunt to any low-income student in the U.S. who needs help. And so we're focused on, we're raising money from the employers that are going to benefit from this talent. So we're raising money from Google and Microsoft and Capital One and Bank of America and other places that need the talent. And then we're investing it in students who are close to graduation, but having to slow down or maybe stop over financial hurdles. We launched in January of 2020 quietly, and we were sort of whispering to different faculty and being like, hey, we have a little bit of money because we only have $100,000. Then COVID happened. And we raised about $300,000 from different funders who wanted to help students because the whole nation was in crisis in terms of higher ed. And a lot of people don't know this, but the CARES Act, if you made under a certain amount of money, I think it was $85,000, you got $1,400 sent to you by the government. If you had a child, you got $700 or so for each of those children. If you were a college student, that money was given to your university and they were supposed to give it to you. Many of those universities have yet to deploy all of their COVID money. So when students were applying to us for financial help in March and April of 2020, we even started before the CARES Act was doing anything. I forced them to apply to their university's fund first and tell me how much their university's fund had given them. And they would say, oh, they gave me $100. They gave me $20. And I'm like, you spent $100 to process that $20. That's maddening, right? And so in many cases, the universities just applied the money to the student's account. So if you had a past due balance, that didn't help you. Like these students I kept 6 students in an Airbnb for 6 months in 2020 because they were literally homeless, because their institution had given them a full ride, including housing and food, and then closed the dorms. And they were just like, what are we supposed to do? So today, the Last Mile Education Fund is available to any student, any gender, at any institution in the U.S. who falls within our funding categories, which are growing all the time, but our core focus is students who are earning a bachelor's degree in a high demand STEM field like computer science, data science, cybersecurity, AI. And we will give them cash up to $600 really fast, be like, just here's some cash. Or depending on what's going on, if they need like a new laptop, or they're trying to get to a summer internship, or there's one of the things we see happen a lot is a student has made it all the way to their final term of their senior year. And because they have a past due balance from the prior term, they won't let them register. So they're like literally 4 to 6 months from the degree and the job. And they often have a job waiting for them. But the school's only leverage is that past due balance, right? So they'll hold them hostage over it. And so we will then pay the past due balance so they can register for the spring term. And then when they graduate, they get their job and they pay their spring term. And on average, we're investing $1,270. It is like a ridiculously low amount of money given the impact, which is we've calculated every student that we get to graduation in 1 year is going to earn $32,459 more than a student with some college and no degree. In 10 years, that student will have a 246x return on investment. They will earn $510,000 more. They will pay $134,000 more in federal taxes. They will save an additional $30,000 towards their retirement, which is wealth generation. And it saves the government $198,000 of social welfare costs. So there's no downside. And we're investing small amounts of money just in time. And what's really special is this is totally done from an abundance and a trust-based viewpoint. So we don't ask for GPA. I don't care what your GPA is. If you've made it this far, like C's get degrees, you need to graduate. So we don't even ask for GPA. We don't make them perform their poverty. I don't want to see your parents' taxes. If you qualified for federally subsidized financial aid, you're poor enough for me. You can have some money. If they don't have that kind of documentation, then we have an interview and talk with them and figure it out. So if they have financial need and they're in one of the majors we have funding for, we say yes. We say yes to every qualified student. And we do it extremely fast, which is so different than how scholarships and the whole notion of scholarships are about like finding outliers. Who's the best of the best, and let's reward them for being the best of the best, versus the idea of outliers, right? It's a lot easier to get straight A's when you're not hungry, worried about where you're going to sleep, or commuting an hour each way. Remove those barriers and those students can do really well.
Ruth, you have shared so much wisdom, so much inspiration today. As we wrap up, what's one message or insight you most want listeners to take away from this conversation?
So I think the key is an abundance viewpoint. Like really check your biases at the door and open your mind to who has potential. And I'll tell a little quick story. When I was launching Aspirations in Computing, I was spamming every teacher in the country, being like, "Hey, we have this program for girls. Please nominate girls." And I got a email from a teacher in the Midwest who was like, "I don't have any girls I would nominate for an award in tech, but I have this boy, and he is amazing, and he does robots and Java, and he's going on and on about this boy. And he's like, do you have an award for him?" And I thought to myself, I'm like, did you just write to a national women's organization and ask us for an award for a boy instead of recommending the girls in your class? So I wrote him back and I said, look, boys are not underrepresented in computing, girls are. So if you could just look around at the girls in your classes and look for signs that they're showing interest and aptitude in this area. And he goes, well, there are these two girls that are constantly trying to show me the animations they build. I'm like, that's them. Those are the girls. And ultimately, that teacher became one of our biggest champions. But he just needed to see that it wasn't just people that reminded him of himself that had potential. That those girls doing animations that he probably thought were dumb were also showing potential. And I think if we all could adopt an abundance viewpoint towards talent and potential, we could go a very, very long way.
Ruth, thank you so much for joining us today. You remind us of what's possible when we invest not just in access, but in true equity. So, to our listeners, I encourage you to learn more about the Last Mile Education Fund. This incredible initiative is helping students overcome the financial barriers to completing their degrees in tech and engineering. And it's a powerful way to make a real difference. You can find out more information at lastmile-ed.org. I'll go ahead and link it for you in the comment section. We're proud to be supported by Solvia Learning Group, whose commitment to advancing education makes conversations like this possible. So if today's episode sparked new ideas or reflections, please be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with fellow educators. It really helps us out. Until next time, keep innovating, keep inspiring, and keep making a difference in the lives of your students.